You know what we got to do. Let's get started. Oh, yes. Matthew, everyday audiophile, music lover. And to start things off, we are having the Chaotic Orbit by Celestial Beer Works. Now, for those in the know, this is a pretty god-tier brewery, is where I would put it. I've never had a bad beer from them. Now, for all the breweries I like, I've never had a bad beer, but this is up there. It's a hazy IPA with oranges, tangerines, and mandarin oranges. So, love it. But that's not the topic of today's video. I want to talk more about the LAiV. This is now the third video that I put out on it, but I want to talk about a recent experience I had with the LAiV Harmony DAC at a friend's house, James' house. So I've talked about his system very briefly before. He has Rockport speakers, don't know the model, powered by a Boulder 2160, and then on the preamp is like an audio research reference. Well, for his family room, I convinced him, after bringing over my LAiV, he picked up the LAiV Harmony DAC as well for the family room, because for that purpose and its form factor and aesthetics, you can't beat it. Truly, I think it's wonderful in those aspects. But came over to hear it and pit it against his MSB DAC. Now I don't know which one it is. It's the bottom tier, and there's like a flagship, and there's one right beneath that, and there's one right beneath that, and that's the one that he has. It's like 15 or 16 grand with dual power supplies. But pitting that against the LAiV. And so I want to paint the picture. Same preamp, same amp out, obviously, through the same Rockport speakers. The LAiV, the digital train on that side, was the Hi-Fi Rose RS-130, I2S into the LAiV, and then on the MSB side, it was the Arender N20 via USB into the MSB DAC. It's a lot of 3 digits. The track that we used, I'm going to get this right, we used the first minute of, there's an artist, his name is Gilad Hekselman. I'm going to post a link down in the description, of a recent live performance live at Village Vanguard, and it was track 3, Equinox. First minute of this track. This is good. This is going to distract me a little bit, I think. Within the first few seconds, it was very immediately obvious that the MSB had this sense of spaciousness around the voices compared to the LAiV. I mean, it wasn't even close. And mind you, this first part was completely blind for me, so I didn't know which input on the audio research was which DAC. I just knew it was input 1 and input 2. And switching between them, first couple seconds, I could tell, oh, this one has more air, while this one sounds like you're halfway back in the stadium, the LAiV. And he agreed very quickly, and he confirmed, yes, the one that sounds better is the MSB. And we switched back and forth a couple times just to confirm, but that's our starting ground. When you're listening to this track, this third track, there is this decay that you get off of the drums and the voices that just seems to go on for 50 feet past, behind the performer on the MSB. And you didn't quite get that on the LAiV. It sounded like the decay just almost immediately. Like you were in a space that was really well treated and there was just no reverb at all. That's not what we want. So I was pretty bummed because I had heard I2S was pretty good on the LAiV. So we were going to call it, but then we said, well, why don't we bring it on to USB? So we did USB instead of I2S through the hi-fi rows. And instantly, things got a little bit better. Oh, and I forgot to mention out. He used the Tier 2 USB cable from Nordos, so it wasn't some $4 cable like what I would use. This was a proper hi-fi cable. But immediately, the hi-fi rows, or the LAiV gained some of that decay, some of that space back. It still wasn't to where the Render and MSB combo was. Mind you, that's what, a $30,000 combo if you were to pay retail for it, but it had that sense of like you could reach out and touch the performers very clearly where they were. You know, with the MSB, you could hear the guitarist Gilad, his hands slide on the guitar and press down on the strings. I mean, it was that intimate how well it presented this live performance for track 3. So we took it one step further. We said, well, maybe it's the hi-fi rows. So we swapped the Render in the hi-fi rows. So now it's the hi-fi rows feeding the MSB via USB, and the Render via USB into the LAiV Harmony DAC. I don't think any sane person would do this because you have a $15,000 transport feeding a $2,700 DAC, but that's what we did. And there were two things that I was surprised about. First, the MSB didn't change at all. Or if it did, it was just ever so slightly. But to my ears, it didn't change at all, which tells us that it has a wonderful USB implementation. It reminded me of my Audio S5 and S4. Pedja, I think his USB implementation is leaps and bounds better than most manufacturers. But that's not the subject of today. It is the LAiV. The Render feeding the LAiV, again, got so much closer to the MSB. It got so close that if you didn't hear the MSB, you would think that the LAiV was a $15,000 DAC. And that speaks a lot to the sensitivity of the LAiV to the source and the source component. And I have mixed feelings about that, right? Like, take a look at the MSB. Next time that I go over to James's house, I'm going to bring a Raspberry Pi with a linear power supply, which was my, you know, maybe not my reference streamer. It's just the one that I've used here, and we're going to see if the MSB changes. And if it doesn't change, which based on last time I was at the house, I believe that to be the case, it tells you that you're always going to get the maximum performance out of the stack, no matter what the source is, which is great because it allows you to, you know, I'm not going to say cheap out, but it allows you to be a little bit more relaxed in some of your component choices because you know that you're always going to get the best out of the best with the MSB. The LAiV, it's sensitive, which is great. You can elevate its performance, but I don't know if that should, if I want that, right? Like when I buy something, I always want it to be its best. And I know that's not the, I know that shouldn't be the case, or it's just not the case in reality. I've heard it, but I mean, I've said it in the last two videos, and this listening experience kind of just reconfirmed that the LAiV is very sensitive, so you need to put a good transport in front of it to get the best out of it, which, that's fine. That's why I picked up this, and I'm going to talk about it in the next video, the Holo Audio Red. I've heard great things about it. There are great measurements online and people that say it sounds great. So it has I2S out, has USB out, has everything that I need, and we're going to see how it sounds. So continuing the journey at James's house, we had the Render, into the hi-fi, or into the LAiV, and the hi-fi rows, into the MSB. Then we swapped cables. Again, kind of getting into that touchy category of cables shouldn't make a difference, but I just heard them make a difference, so they must make a difference. we swapped the tier cables that the LAiV was doing, and we gave it the best cables and brought that over to the MSB, and then it got the Heimdall cables. So still great cables, but not tier 2 level cables. This IPA is so good, by the way. And again, we saw the LAiV performance drop ever so slightly. And this could have just been confirmation bias, but to my ears, it still had some wonderful decay. But instead of going back, let's say the 50 feet of the MSB, or the 40 feet that it had with the tier 2, it was now 25 to 30 feet, which is still a very expansive space, just not quite there. And the MSB throughout all of this had this background noise that just kind of sounded like what you would hear in a giant amphitheater. Excuse me. The spirit's doing it to me. It sounded like that kind of just low level noise that you'd hear in an amphitheater that just gave you that sense of realism if you closed your eyes. And the LAiV never had that. And I don't know why the LAiV doesn't have that. It's going to require more listening. I'm going to go back over to James's house. I'm going to bring this Holo Audio Red, and we're going to see if this gets close to the aw render. Because if it does, you now have a $800 streamer that you compare with a $2,700 DAC to get you 90% of a $30,000 solution. And if that's the case, we're going to report our findings and tell all of our friends, and that's going to be that. So I brought the LAiV back home, and I did hook it up to this Holo Audio Red. It is better than my Raspberry Pi. That's a good thing. I'd hope that something that's $800 is going to be better than my Raspberry Pi. Now, it's better than my Raspberry Pi for the LAiV in that I'm getting a little bit more of that decay. Like when I compare the audio versus the LAiV, the audio already had this decay. Maybe not MSB levels of decay, but it's hard to tell how comparable they are because I would need to hear the audio on his speakers or his MSB on my speakers, so I can switch back and forth between the two, because trying to remember between a road trip, even if it's a 15 or 20 minute road trip, is no good. No one's memory is that good. So I'm going to bring this over to his house. We're going to see if we can approach the level of performance that he's getting, which would make him pretty sad considering the money he spent, but is good for people like me that want that performance but don't have that kind of money to spend. So, moral of the story is confirmed LAiV Harmony is still super sensitive to the source. Even going from a Raspberry Pi to the Raspberry Pi with a linear power supply showed improvements. And again, this is always going to be in the air. The bass didn't really change its character. It was still pretty laid back, still pretty, still firm but didn't have as much kick as the audio. The mids were still pretty smooth. There was a little less semblance with the LPS power supply, and even less with this, which is wonderful because it was one of my complaints with the LAiV was semblance. So that kind of went away almost entirely with the Holo Red, which I love. I just need to see, what kind of performance can we achieve? How high can we take it? And that's where I'm going to test next and report back to y'all. But hey, we're reaching that 15-minute limit that I like. I'll talk to you guys next time. I'm going to put links to everything that I talked about down below per request. I'll chat with y'all next time. See ya.